And most of the spring ephemerals and some of the early things we plant in our gardens are used to a little cold. I noticed last night it was 26 degrees when I got up this morning. So you don't know in the spring. But most plants have a plan B. In other words, they don't rely on just one trigger to say, oh yeah, it's time to emerge, it's time to bloom. We got to make seeds quickly because there's still sun available to us. So that's the story on the spring ephemerals. Of course, we could talk about fruit trees and other things that can really get harmed, right, by a late frost. I stopped here because I wanted to show you, we were just talking about shade tolerance and natural succession. Here's the woods. What's happening over here? These are aspen trees. And when we talk about an open area gradually being turned into woods, what we're talking about is a tree like the aspen that's able to colonize here because there's full sun. It has no shade tolerance. In order to open up the canopy so those young oak saplings and seedlings get enough sun to mature. Does that make sense? Yes, natural succession to me, it's so fascinating, but it can be also a little complicated. But depending on what part of the state you're in, natural succession is pretty orderly unless we have some major disturbance like a tornado or a windstorm or a fire or people going in and logging or whatever it might be. And it's pretty cool because you can stand back and watch what happens. Within our lifetime, we can see a lot of change. Questions at all? All right, let's get into the woods. Not only do the trees change based on shade tolerance, so do the mid-layer and the ground layer species of plants. There's so much to look at in here. Once you start looking around, hopefully I can point to some of these things and everybody can see them. This tiny little delicate white thing here called mitrewort. Do you see it? Then there's, there's Dutchman's breeches, which is just about finished. That's this lacy leaf. Let's see if we can, do you see one?
We're looking at other things.
Okay. So that's a survival strategy. The ephemeral habit is a survival strategy for all of these little plants. They emerge, they blossom, they make seeds, and they disappear. In 3 weeks, many of these little plants will be gone. So ephemeral, short-lived.
That was the one plant you pointed out? Was that the one?
That's
one you said? Or?
Yeah, that's the mitrewort. But there's so many other, bloodroot, let me finish. Bloodroot, the name comes from the red sap, bloodroot. The Native Americans, I understand, used it to dye lots of stuff. They used it for paint in ceremonies. They used it to dye baskets, buckskins, other clothing. They used it for insect repellent. That plant, hepatica, was used to treat liver ailments. It's also in the buttercup family. It amazes me how many of these spring wildflowers are in that family. It's a big family, Ranunculaceae. And even though the flower can look very different, it's classified in that same family. We walked right past a yellow bellwort. Do you see the tall plant here? It's a Uvularia. This one, if you look at the leaf, and it looks like the stem pierces the leaf. Do you see that? The stem goes right up through the leaf. That's Uvularia grandiflora. There's another one called Cecifolia, where the leaf looks like a normal leaf. It's not encircling the stem like you see this one. This one's more common. Beautiful, isn't it? Aureliaceae family, so same family, related to the regular ginseng, which, as most of you know, is desirable for various purposes. This one is not harvested like the other one because it's so tiny. We'll see some more of that. I'm sure there's more of that on this side. It's called May apple. It's kind of a misnomer. It doesn't produce an apple or a fruit in May, but it blossoms in May. And it does produce a fruit. It's only plants that have 2 leaves like this one, and you can see the flower bud in the middle. They have enough energy to produce a flower and eventually seeds. A single stemmed mayapple is not going to produce a flower because it's not able to photosynthesize enough to produce enough energy to run the reproductive cycle. So they just forego that and survive.
Yeah.
So it's perennial if it doesn't flower, or even if it does?
Yes, it multiplies by underground rhizomes. So even if it doesn't produce seeds, it's going to spread. And maybe you see that on your own property. A little dwarf ginseng. Look at, there's a bee on there pollinating it. Do you see that?
Yep.
Sipping the nectar.
And that's the wild
This is miterwort. This is wild ginger.
ginger.
Yep. And there's wild geranium in here. That's this leaf here. It's kind of rounded, although each section is pointed, and that's just starting to bloom in some areas, but obviously not here yet. What else? Virginia water leaf is another one. The leaf looks like it was splashed with water. It's got light color splotches on the leaves. It's not blooming yet, but it won't be long. It's this one here. Look at the leaf. Do you see the marks, the light colored marks on it?
Yeah.
And that tends to spread, pretty well. I've got some of that in my yard. Oh, here's cutleaf toothwort. Just about walked right past it. That's this one. Delicate, but look at the neat looking leaves on that one. There are 52 species of purple violets in the state of Wisconsin. And they hybridize, making identification tricky. There's white violets, there are yellow violets, but all the violets can be divided into 2 groups. One group, the leaves and the blossoms, come right up from the root. The other group, like this yellow one, you have a stem, and then you have the leaves and the blossoms coming off of that main stem. Really easy to see. So right away, if you're trying to identify these things, it's either one or the other. And then you've only got, what did they say, 900 species of violets in the world, 52 in the state. You've narrowed it down considerably. Make it your life work and you probably will, figure it out. Since we now have DNA technology at our fingertips, wow, they're rearranging things. This is with birds, with all kinds of things. And so that means a change in names, scientific names.
It's confusing.
It is confusing. So you learn, way back when I took a plant taxonomy class at UW-Madison, the final exam was finding 20 acres within easy driving distance of Madison, going out one-on-one with the professor, 20 acres, and being able to identify every plant. Now we're talking about flowering, non-flowering, so we're talking about spore producers like mosses. We're talking about lichens, which are somewhat related but not truly plants. I mean, wow. And nowadays I see people with their app and they pointed at the flower and they go, oh, yeah, that's a Thalictrum dioecium or whatever it is. But to me, if you're going to truly learn the plant, that doesn't do it for me. I have to do something more with it. I have to sit down with a key and with no pictures and figure out, maybe it takes 20 minutes. But then I've got, I've learned that plant. I now know what that plant is. And the other thing about a guide is you learn other things. Is it edible? Is it medicinal? Does it have some utilitarian purpose? Lots of fascinating things to learn about plants. And it seems the more you learn, the more you realize you need to learn. But do you see those huge leaves down there right where it's wet? Well, that's skunk cabbage. And With skunk cabbage, the flower emerges in the winter when there's still snow on the ground. Now, and it looks really different. It looks like this. Okay, it's maroon. The plant looks like it's wearing a hood. So if the temperature is above 32 degrees, it will maintain a 70-degree temperature. Can you believe it?
Oh, man.
Yeah, talk about adaptation. It's really getting the jump on things, right? It's getting full sun. Yeah, it's cold, but it's adapted to surviving this way. I think, these survival adaptations are fascinating. So why does it produce heat? I mean, that's a question, because it's so unusual. Well, it speeds the development of the plant. It helps to emit chemical fragrances that attract pollinators, because it's got to be pollinated, right? And, well, who knows what else? But those are pretty important. Those are survival kind of adaptations. Okay, and then after the plant, or the flower I should say, has run its course, produced seeds, then the leaves emerge. And that's what we're seeing down here, those big oval leaves. And they call it skunk cabbage because most people think it has a bit of a disagreeable odor. But I've heard other people say, no, it smells like a cross between garlic and car tires or some ridiculous thing. Who knows? It's going to be different for everybody. But I don't think it's necessarily skunk. The short needled, like over in here, are hemlocks. You're also going to see plants, more northern species of ground layer plants, like Canada Mayflower. And I would invite you to walk this trail all the way to the end and then come back out. It seems to me you see increasingly northern species the farther you go that way. So you're going to see partridge berry and wintergreen and blueberry, all kinds of things that we don't typically see growing here in our oak hickory or maple basswood woods.
Is this a rue? This rue?
That's early meadow rue. Good eyes. And the flowers don't have petals. Can you see? How can I explain this? It's pendulous. It's hanging down, and you see how the wind shakes those are the stamens. It's wind pollinated is what I'm trying to show you. And not everybody's going to be able to see this. But what you notice when you look at this is there are no bright showy petals, right? Well, a plant is not going to produce, it's not going to use energy to produce a bright showy flower if it's not going to attract pollinators. Who cares, right? Instead, it'll conserve that energy and it will produce the structure of a flower that easily catches the wind. And then the wind will pollinate this little flower. Good eyes, thanks for seeing that. It's called Dame's Rocket, do you know it? It has 4 petals. And it grows along the road, it grows all over the place. And people think it's beautiful. Well, it is. But it's also invasive. And it'll crowd native species out. So a lot of people, when they see it, they just pull it out. But this is the native woodland flax. This is the good guy. And, for the most part, here's a Jacob's ladder that's starting to bloom. It's also blue. For the most part, the native plants appear to be well behaved. Do you know what I mean? They don't have a growth habit that spreads quickly at the expense of other species. It's not going to grow such that it crowds other species out, usually. This is Ranunculus fascicularis, it's early buttercup. Some more of the Jacob's ladder, some more of the woodland flax. So you see we have a little different exposure here. This is catching the sun more. So some of the flowers that weren't quite blooming on the other side where we came in now are beginning to open up. Flavoring. There's 2 species of sweet Sicily that grow here. Here's another one that's closer to the trail. Really fuzzy. The stem is fuzzy, the leaves are fuzzy.
So the licorice smell or taste as well? Is it edible?
Well, they use the leaves for flavoring, so I'm assuming, I've never tried it.
Yeah. Interesting. We love that smell.
This is more common. Oh, this plant, here's an interesting thing. Now this plant has 2 leaves and a flower. So that flower is a female flower. If it only has 1 leaf, it'll be a male flower. Because it takes more energy to produce seeds. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like we talked about before. 2 leaves, more photosynthesis, producing more glucose, food for the plant. So it can do it. It can produce the blossom and seeds. And it does produce a column of bright red, some of you probably know, you have seen it in the seed stage, fruits, bright red fruits with seeds inside. Anyways, so it can be female this year because it's producing 2 leaves, which depends on the amount of food it produced last season. But next year, maybe we don't have such a good growing season, it could be male. The flower could be male because it didn't store up enough food. Isn't that interesting? One, anyways, is that we call this one red elderberry. It's blooming now, so it blooms a lot earlier than the other one. And the shape of the flower, well, it's shaped more like a pyramid. Do you see that? Yeah. Whereas the other elderberry has a flat, broad, white blossom. And these fruits stay red. The fruits on the edible elderberry turn really dark purple, almost black when they're, so you can't go wrong. This, the rubra, tends to grow in a greater degree of shade, like we have here. And the other elderberry along the edge, or even into the open a little. So, anyways, getting pretty thick in here with, there's gooseberry and there's black raspberries and all kinds of shrubs coming in here. Chokecherry, here's a little elm. Let's get everybody in front of this rock face. You might be wondering, this is not a geology hike, why are we talking about rocks? We're talking about plant succession, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you got a bare rock. How is it? Look at what's growing on this rock. I mean, we've got lichen. See the light green, scaly, flaky looking stuff? That's the first organism to colonize this rock. It's a mutualistic relationship between an alga and a fungus. The alga produces the green color. Oh, now it can make food. It can photosynthesize. Okay. The fungus produces the holdfast, sticks it to the rock, and stores water. They help each other out. Okay, they will grow there, and as they grow there, over the years, they will secrete a weak acid. So every time it rains, you've got a weak acid. Now that rock is getting little tiny crevices and cracks in it. Okay? The lichens don't live forever. They die back. They're adding a little bit of organic matter into those crevices and cracks. Oh, look what's coming. Mosses now. A little more advanced plant. They require more organic matter. They actually have rhizoids, which aren't true roots, but they're root-like. They need some soil, very simple soil. So now, look at the mosses here are flourishing. All different kinds of mosses. Mosses don't live forever, right? They die back. They add organic matter to the top of that rock in those crevices. Well, look what's coming. We've got blue cohosh. And we have all kinds of plants. I can't even see them all to tell you what they are. Anybody? Oh, there's some trilliums over there growing on them, some ferns. So now we have spore-producing and flower-producing plants, very sophisticated, able to get a foothold on that rock. It all starts with the lichen. And most people will walk past lichens every day, not even glance, oh, yeah, interesting. It's part of the rock. It's really not. It's 2 living organisms making way for something much more sophisticated. So you can look at it as a kind of a parade of plants moving through here over time. Let's go a little farther. I wonder how we're doing on time.
It's 3 till 11.
We have 3 minutes. so we should have had.
How long you want to go, Kathy?
Okay, looks like a little grass. It's very delicate. It's called Pennsylvania sedge. And the way to tell the difference between a grass and a sedge is that a grass has a round stem. You can roll it in your fingers. Sedges have edges. They have a triangular stem, and you can feel the edges when you roll it in your finger. Now, this Pennsylvania sedge grows everywhere except in wet ground. So it's not a wetland species, but it grows in many other habitats. And because of that reason, I know for some time it was being researched as a ground cover for our yards as an alternative to lawns that require fertilizer, pesticide, water, and so forth. Heavy maintenance kind of areas. I'm not sure where we are with that. Now we have low mow grasses, grasses that will grow to a certain height and you don't have to mow them and they don't require lots of input to look presentable. Oh, that's a moss.
That is a kind of moss?
That's a moss, yep. Mosses have two generations. They have the gametophyte, which is what you see here. Then they have the sporophyte generation. So when you see a stem and a capsule, that's a second generation.
Okay.
The capsule will be full of spores. And when that's ripe, the lid pops off and the wind or the rain will disperse those spores everywhere.